I'm Sofiya, I'm from Bulgaria, and I'm not of a Romani background. I'm a researcher of Romani culture. I speak the Romani language, and because Romani language is so important for the Roma, sometimes I'm labeled as Roma by the Roma themselves, but I'm not of a Romani background. What I do here, I work at the Finnbogadóttur Institute of Foreign Languages at the University of Iceland, and I cover the Romani language part at the newly opened center. So I collect Romani literature and do a database of titles by authors of Romani Gypsy background and in Romani language. What would the first, this is a bit already suggests something, but what would be when we say Roma folks or Gypsy, what would be the first things that you think about? What is that?
Crimes and no education.
Yes. Yeah. It's the yes. Yeah. Generally, the first things that appear, this, and of course these are the first association that we have, and we researchers say that we have these two extremes between which the image of the Roma is always positioned. That is exotic and free-spirited. That is something that we know from the age of Romanticism and all the literature and arts pieces featuring the exotic gypsy, and poor and marginal that actually prevails today because we have so many materials in media depicting poor Roma on the streets all over Europe, begging with their kids. And what we don't see, but actually this majority of Roma gypsies, these are just people who are invisible for us because they do the things that the majority do, or like the lay people do. So they have like regular jobs, they might be in the cleaning service. There are lots of teachers in East European countries, lots of doctors, or the many people doing like ordinary professions, and of course there are lots of people doing manual labor or cleaning services. That is also something that is related to the job occupation of the Roma. But of course, thinking in stereotypes, if I say to people on the Balkans, Iceland or Norway, it will be immediately, labeled as Vikings, or, like not farmers, but actually pretty wild things that we see in the Vikings movie on Netflix or stuff like this. So we usually think in stereotypes. But of course, the Roma gypsies are a bit particular because they live all over the world. They are depicted so much in artistic pieces, and because they became really very poor in East European countries where the most of the Roma live, and came to Europe, they were really visible in welfare states, such poor and marginal people to come. And what I'm going to do now is just provide a short, really very encyclopedic and basic things that we know for the history, language, and identity of the Roma. Then I will focus on the educational level and the tendencies that we observe, of course, with the note that everything is very general, and every case has to be taken on its own. Then I'm going to speak about the challenges and difficulties that Roma may have in accessing the educational system. Then I was asked to also say a few things that might be good to know when US educators communicate with the Romani families, and some good practices that actually I'm sure overlap a lot with your experience already in working just with kids, not with Roma kids. But as the basic thing, so one of the really very misleading thing about the Roma is that when we say Roma, we mean a particular population that in the Middle Ages migrated from India to the European continent. So usually they imagined as one thing but actually they live in many states, they belong to different groups, they have different religion. Not all speak the Romani language today, but they spoke it in the past. So then what makes a gypsy or Roma is actually the attitude of the outsiders. But also Roma themselves, they are aware that they are kind of unity, because they know that the Roma speak the Romani language, and Roma from different countries, when they meet, they could use the Romani language for communicating. And which will be the first question they ask themselves when they meet is, from which Roma do you come from? Which is your group? But of course this is also contextual. So if I meet Roma from Romania in Norway and I ask them, which Roma are you from? And they would say, I'm a Romanian Roma. But then if I want them to precise, is it profession? Are you Muslim? They would focus on some specific things. So it depends on the context. And if a Romani person from Europe goes to a conference in New York, because their annual Romani conferences is one of the university there, they would present themselves as European Roma, but if they meet Roma from the next village, it would be completely different. So really things are contextualized, and the group belonging is the most important thing for the Roma. They follow the rules of the group, and they ideally marry within the group to which they belong. So we speak of identity markers. So what makes a Roma is not even speaking the Romani language, although this is very important, but different markers that they consider important for themselves. Very often this is the Romani dress, and usually the female traditional dress, which is something that we know from other culture as well. There is nothing unique about the Roma. Sometimes it could be a profession as musical, flower selling, or even traveling lifestyle. So in the UK, the Romani gypsies, for them it's really important that you have the right to travel. So these traditional cards were really important for their identity. For some is doing trade, so there are different things, but it's important what Roma consider for themselves. And one of the things that they consider is, of course, to be born within the Romani family, very often to speak the Romani language, and of course to follow the rules of the group to which you belong. But what definitely is not Romani culture is being poor. We indeed see these pictures. So if we Google Roma or Romani gypsies, most of the things will appear with this, of course, along with colorful clothes and traveling lifestyle clothes. But of course, being poor and marginal is not being Roma. It's not equalized with this. And actually, the Roma who live in like normal housing are much more than what we usually see in media. This is just a short, very general migration path of the Roma. So it was through linguistics that we were able to follow, the science was able to follow the path of the Roma, because they were considered to be Egyptian, because Gypsy Egyptian, so it's the etymology, it was believed they come from Egypt, but it's nothing like this, because linguistic data allows us to know approximately the time of leaving India and then settling in Byzantine Empire, so within the European continent. And there are lots of linguistic influences on the Romani language from Greek. That's how linguists know that it's in which period and how long did Roma live in the Byzantine Empire. Some of them stayed, but some migrate westwards due to different reasons about which we still argue. And of course they reach Northern Europe and later the Americas. And how about Roma in Iceland? So they are, of course, the earliest data which I have found is at the beginning of 20th century. Gypsy family came from Denmark to Iceland. They were horse dealers. So, and the data says that they were buying horses with which they left the country because of their horse dealing profession. So I would dig into that. And also they were Roma from Sweden who were coming in the 70s with ferries from Norway here. They say to me they didn't like it because of the weather. They don't believe me that I would like to live in Iceland. So it's so Roma were here historically, maybe not for a long time, but still there is some presence, and I'm curious to learn more about the history of their presence. But how about now? Most of them come out of socioeconomic reasons to Iceland, just looking for a better future. So the family that is here, that took picture of themselves at the Blue Lagoon, they are Bulgarian Roma living at Keflavik, with a very good example of integration into the society, because they work at the airport. They are since 4 years here, and they already have their houses with that are their own. So it's they're really very successful. They brought their children with their parents, so it's really a successful model of integration. There is a cohort of children with Romani background who were adopted by Icelandic parents as well. And what is interesting, these are the two guys here. And there are also 40 of them, and what is interesting is that their parents want to bring them with pride of their Romani heritage, so they don't want to hide their origin, just the opposite. They want them to know that, and to know that being Roma is not being poor, but having history, having language, having publications in Romani language. So this is a very interesting thing, and these parents, they gather the kids together on the International Day of the Roma, the 8th of April. So I think it's really fascinating, and these kids are just doing great in school. And this girl is an Austrian Roma who came here to be volunteer in one organization. Then she started being au pair with an Icelandic family. She now left the country, but she maybe plans to come back because she found an Icelandic boyfriend. So we'll see. And another couple, young couple, they just had their baby, and they're also working here. Of course, I guess some of the Roma stay invisible because they are just Bulgarian nationals, Romanian nationals, or Lithuanian nationals, but still some want to reveal their Romani heritage. And the Romani language, as I said, is something really important for the identity of the Roma. Speaking the language is something really they treasure, even though they might have lost the language. There are different dialects. Sometimes people can face difficulties in understanding each other, but generally the basic vocabulary is common, and with a goodwill and with flexibility and with some experience in communicating with other dialects, people can understand themselves. And the Romani language, although it doesn't have a written tradition that dates back to centuries ago, has a very dynamic development in the 20th century. And the Romani language, it repeats the traditions of all European languages. So the first text to appear in Romani language were the Bible translations in different dialects, and also the folklore was collected and put down in written form too. And this is pretty much what happens to all European languages. There are some countries in which Romani language is taught in school for those students for which the parents choose the Romani as a language of instruction or as a facultative language. And these are not necessarily countries in which Roma are a considerable part of the population, just countries that adopted certain policies. So actually the conditions in which Romani language is taught depends more on the policies of the state and not the size of the Romani group or the size of the people who speak the Romani language. And Sweden is a good example of this. For example, Roma are not that many, but still Roma can study Romani in school and in all different dialects that are spoken by the groups there. And we speak about the boom of Romani language publications in the last 20 or already 30 years. So we have a fully fledged spectrum of literature with novels, lots of poetry. Of course, I told already about the folklore materials, short stories, and this is a comics that is devoted to the destiny of a Romani girl, now an old lady who passed away recently, who survived the Holocaust. So this is her memory, in a comics, in a very attractive presentation, in a very attractive and child-friendly way. It's really very important when we speak about Roma to know to which Romani group the Roma belong, but also to which historical region Roma belong in the past. So when we speak about the Ottoman Empire, so that means that if Roma came from former Yugoslavia countries or from Turkey, that means that they would be probably from a settled community, because in the Ottoman Empire the majority of the Roma were actually settled, so it's long ago. But if we speak about the Russian Empire, so it's they were both settled and traveling Roma, but they were pretty well off because of their profession, practiced in the homes of aristocracy, so they were playing musicians and they were earning really good money until the Russian Revolution. And since most of the Roma who come from to the Nordic countries came from Romania, we have to point out that it's actually Romania unites two regions. One that was the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, that were semi-vassal principalities to the Ottoman Empire, in which Roma or gypsies then belonged to were a sort of slave, but it's not exactly a slavery, but they were attached to a land that was owned by landlords, by monasteries, and by different governing bodies, so to say. So they were pretty immobile at that time. But also Transylvania is a region that historically belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and in this region Roma were pretty much mobile since very late period, even in the 20th century. And actually there are lots of Transylvania Roma coming to Nordic countries and being quite visible because of their lifestyle, because of certain professions that they do, like the begging or collecting of scraps and plastics. So these are usually Transylvania Roma. And since most of the East European Roma migrate to many of them migrate to Western Nordic countries, we have to know that there is a lot of influence from the period of communism. So actually the totalitarian states made many changes in the life of the Roma that are quite positively evaluated by both Roma and researchers and historians. So it was a settlement, it was providing of housing, providing of jobs for those who didn't have, and these were the majority of the Roma, and the compulsory education. Of course, this was the ideal picture, so not everything was followed, and there were, of course, Roma out of the system, so to say, but there was a lot in terms of access to education and employment during the time of communism. And I haven't encountered a single Roma from the East European bloc who is not nostalgic about the time of the socialism. There are of course different reasons, but main thing was the social security that they felt. Some Roma, for the first time, they have their housing, they were able to have jobs, to have good payment, and so on. And some on the side of that, on the top of that, even managed to practice some traditional professions as tinsmithing and even fortune telling. So and things like this. But of course this was not the case in many of the Western or Nordic countries. So Sweden is an interesting example, although today there are lots of policies in the field of education and social welfare when we talk about Romani communities. In the 60s, even in the 60s, the things were pretty different. So Roma were not accessing school, they were not having a housing, they were not having access to the labor market. And so there was a lot of activities done by the Roma themselves, raising the issue of their rights as Swedish citizens. And probably some of you have heard about Katarina Taikon, who wrote Katici series, a children book telling about the life of a Romani girl. So she was also a human rights activist, particularly on for the rights of the Roma as citizens of the Swedish state. And so after the 1990s, we have the crash of the communist regimes. We have a crisis in the economy of the most of the states, and the one who suffered the most were the Roma, because they were just manual laborers in the factories primarily. Also, some lost their housing and the social benefits that they had, and this was pretty much valid for the majority population as well. But what was different is that there was a race of nationalism and blaming the Roma for crisis in the countries. Like, for example, there were many countries with demographic crisis even now, and the one to be blamed are the Roma, because according to the discourse of the nationalists, they are the one who have lots of children versus the majority who are not having that many children. And the crash in the economy would be blamed on the Roma as well, because they were supposedly taking too much social benefits. So all the usual stuff that we can hear from the nationalist discourse in all the countries actually today. Many of the Roma, of course, try to find their way to countries with better economies where they can work. And here is again this family, this guy, and this is his father. They are Roma who work in a restaurant and already living here since 5 years. They are strong supporters, of course, of the Icelandic national team. Now about education. Of course, this is very general thing, but on the overall, we have to say that the education, the educational level and access to education among the Romani communities depends on which community we are speaking about. So, which group do the Roma belong to? A general trend is that among all the Romani groups, the level of education is increasing. So, this is a steady trend since the time of communism for the East European Roma, and in the West it is from the 1990s. But generally we have a steady increase. There are some problems about which I'm going to talk about in a minute that are related to the access of the girls to the educational system. And usually the women and the girls, they have lower level of education than the men in Romani communities. But at the same time, if they already complete higher education, the Romani women are more likely to enroll in the universities, and this is actually a general trend that we know from all communities. It is usually that the girls enroll at the university. What is interesting to point out that among some Roma there is this wrong perception that being educated is not a Romani thing. It's a non-Romani thing. And actually, because they've heard it, I guess many communities heard it so much. Oh, Roma, they are not educated, they don't want to go to school. The kids, they want to sleep till late, they can't wake up early and stuff like this. So I believe that many of them have internalized this discourse, believing that, okay, this is not for us. And of course, there is institutional discrimination as well, because in many countries, Roma were just put in segregated schools, in special schools for children that are not doing very well, or put at the last corners of the room. I've been going to school with Roma, and there were different approaches of the educators. So so in one grade, the Romani kids, they were just at the back, so they were just ignored in a way, in a spatial way as well. But in the next grade, we were mixed together. So a Roma kid was sitting with a non-Roma kid, and so on. We were almost half-half. So there are of course different approaches, but generally, even me, I felt in the classroom as a non-Roma that they were different, and teachers thought they were doing worse than the others. And when we speak about the problematic things, we have to say that there are groups among which access to education is problematic, and one of the main obstacles is the early marriages that may occur in the families. So teenage girls are supposed to get married, and the main reason that the Roma state themselves, because I was doing research for UNICEF exactly on the access to education and the marriage, the relation between the two. So most of the Roma, they would say that is the virginity requirement. So the Romani girl has to enter into a marriage as a virgin, and this is a thing that we know not from Romani culture but from many other cultures as well. And this requirement is something that Roma consider very important for them and for their community. It's of course related to the status of the family and many other things that reflect the community culture. So this is one of the main things. And as the teenage girls today, so the girls who go to high school, they often can have sexual intercourse. This is considered unacceptable by the Roma. So they would say, no, we are not allowing our girls to go to high school because we think that she might meet someone, you know, and she's a sort of endangered. Her virginity is endangered in a way. But of course, these are only certain communities. Of course, not all the Roma. We have to be clear about that. And then there are, of course, other different factors. It could be just being extremely poor. You can imagine that the Roma living in Košice, Slovakia, that is one of the neighborhoods that is highly circulated in European media when poor, segregated and marginal communities are given as Roma communities are given as example. So we can imagine that people living there, you know, going to university is not priority number one. So there are really some basic things that they have to focus on before thinking about the education of the kids. And sometimes it's just the lack of school in the place where Roma live. It could be a village, it could be a small city, and there the education could be by the primary school level. So they cannot enroll in secondary education if they don't have the means for transport, if they are worried about the girls traveling, and so there could be many different factors. But we are speaking about communities in Eastern European countries where the Roma live compactly. And what is really important is to have a role model. What we know from all communities that had a lower level of education is that you have to have a role model. The first to walk are pioneers. I have a friend who is who in the 60s was the first university graduate in her community, and it was considered almost on the age of a scandal, you know, getting to university, being a school in the Romani school teacher in the Romani school. But today actually it's just by default that everyone can and ideally would enroll in the university in this community of several thousand Roma. So it's a big community. But the question is the first, like to have pioneers, to have people who would do it in the community or in the family. And we have also to know that you know, Roma are not just out of space when assessing education as social capital. When they are unemployed, when they live in countries in which Roma are the last to get a job, most likely they don't have a job, so they are unemployed, so they don't think the education is a social capital that would secure a better future. And I was speaking a lot with Romani grandmothers who graduated higher education, but their granddaughters are not going to, so they are hardly graduating the primary school. And this is actually a very striking tendency that goes opposite to all that is the general tendency. And I was asking them why. And the grandmothers, they were telling me, okay, it was socialism. I went to high school, I got education because I knew I'm going to go to work for the municipality or for the factory. But now I'm sure that my granddaughter won't have an education, even though she has an education, won't have a job. Therefore, I'd better leave her here and, help me in the housework and things like this. And they are same granddaughters, the granddaughters of these grandmothers who live in France, for example, or in Italy or in other countries. They go to school because they think that, yes, there's job there, and when they go to school, maybe this will open doors for them for better employment. So there are different factors which we have to have in mind. And when we speak about the factors that we have really to contrast, when we see that there is a problematic situation, we have to contrast it with a situation that is really positive, and to see what happened, that in communities the education is just a normal thing. And usually it's having a role model, being educated in the family since many generations, having also individuals who would invest their time and effort in helping the children to get better education. So we have many volunteers in some Romani communities. There are church priests from the evangelical church in among East European Romani communities who are working a lot with Romani kids, trying to help them in homework writing, in access to school, in providing materials, and also, of course, teachers of a Romani or non-Romani background who work with these kids. And also the social mobility is a strong factor. So when Roma live in really isolated or segregated neighborhood where there is only unemployment, not good perspective, it's one thing. But the more mobile they are, the more models they see, the more opportunities, and the more they assess education as a social capital for their kids. And of course, having a long-term strategy to live in a country of migration is a thing that is important, because some Romani families, they migrate, they do so-called circular migration. So they go for 3 months up to half a year in one country, they go back to their country and invest in this country and in building homes there. But this is not good for the kids, regardless of the fact if they go with the parents or they stay in the place of origin, because they're with their grandparents, sometimes they cannot maybe take a good care of them, or if they go with the parents in migration, maybe they're not enrolled in school, or so having a long-term strategy for living in a certain country is really an important thing. And this is just a quote from a conversation with Romani women from a community, that they've seen education as a model since many decades. So it was in the 30s of the 20th century they were the first women who received education in these communities. So now their model of educating girls is just like the mainstream, the majority society actually. And if we talk about specific cultural norms, if we face such, so one of the things we really have to know is that Romani parents, they cherish and value their children a lot. Not having children is a real disaster, of course, in many families, but in Romani families it's really very important. So sometimes being Romani families bringing their kids on the street or incorporating them in economic activities doesn't necessarily mean that they don't take care of the Romani, of their children. And when we speak about the decision taking powers, we have to know that So the authority comes with the age, and we know this from many cultures, of course. It's ideally the grandparents or the grandmother and the grandfather from the father's side that are really important. Many Roma today, they migrate without the grandparents, so it's their parents who are the authority, so to say, but it's usually the mother that is the link between the kid and all the institution, so being municipality, hospital, school, or whatever. So this is something that we have to have in mind. And the virginity of the girl, I already talked about these concerns about teenage girls attending schools among some Romani groups that practice early marriages. And what we also have to know is that Roma, they don't come from different continents, they come from Europe. They've lived in Europe for many centuries, so they're well aware of how the system works in every country. So sometimes but the general thing is that they know the majority society norms in general, and they know their own norms. So we say they live at least in two dimensions: in their community dimension, so with their cultural norms, and within the majority society, and they are very well aware of this, and they share with the majority all the rules and values. But in cases where the norms of the Romani community would clash with the majority society norm, the norm of the Romani community would take over in general. So the example with the early marriages is, so Roma are very well aware about the legal age for marriages and the compulsory education requirements that these are European things. I don't think there's country in Europe in which they are not a common standard, at least. But when a girl lost her virginity or wants to marry to a certain boy, then maybe she can drop out of school even without graduating compulsory education. And these are things that are still happening in some Romani communities. But the Roma themselves, they are very well aware of what the norms are, what the legislation is. So very general things that come out of my experience in the last 10 years with East European Roma in their countries of origin and in migration. So when we see a certain problem in a kid and in a student, I know like the first thing is to think about that it happens because it's a gypsy child or it's from Romani background, but my advice would be to maybe search for a mainstream reason. So maybe it's an adaptation, maybe it's another thing, maybe it's individual. So there are different factors, and blaming the Romani or gypsy culture about it might be really harmful for the child. Then another thing that I think it's important is really to ensure that all kids are equal, but don't adopt a very specific Romani approach, positive or negative. I already mentioned like putting the Romani kids on the back in the classroom or just ignoring the Romani kids. This is something, of course, that you already know, but also stressing too much on the Romani background or trying to have a specific group of Romani kids and working with them. I don't think it's a good thing. Like adopt as much mainstream approach as possible. The female responsibility was already mentioned, but also I think that the aspirations of the family, so the thing with the circular migration or the plans for the family to stay in a country. So just try to see if a family really wants to stay in Iceland, for example, have long-term plans. That means that they would be really willing to invest and to do many things for the education of their children and for their children's integration into the society. Something which really works well is having the kids in extracurricular activities, I don't know how these are labeled here, but after school or some kind of activities, it's a very successful model. Romani kids who are like problematic in terms of risk of dropping out of school or really having low marks in school, having just a sport club of something that was of their interest, like trigger their interest to spend more time in school, to mingle more with the school. So having this is, I'm sure this is something that is already here, but if the Roma kids don't participate in this activity, just be sure to take them in. And also something is like empowerment of the kids, something that worked well, I think. So these kids here, they were like early teenage boys that were really naughty and very undisciplined in school, but they were assigned a task of taking care of the Christmas celebration for all the grades for all the 3 classes of the 8th or 7th grade, and they felt really, they identified with the school and they were very serious about it, and this is something that really triggered their interest and also changed their point of view. Now they wanted the others to be disciplined. So this is something that might work. Also, so this is a club of a Romani and non-Romani girls. It's in Vojvodina in Serbia. This is a Romani teacher. She set up a club of like a sort of teenage feminist club, and she assigned tasks to all the participants to pick up a Romani personality. To pick up a Romani personality, a female personality in the world, and to present this personality with her biography and visual materials and so on. So these were things that, because it's actually, they see role models, not only from their country or community, but throughout the world, so they see that things can work. So if they can be poetess, actress, or journalist, and so on. And having Roma on board, I think this is not something that is relevant for Iceland, because there's not a big Romani community, but clubs, parents clubs were working very well. So having the parents or the grandmothers or mothers coming like for informal conversation over the education of the children, having people of Romani background working in the cleaning services or in the kitchen is something that matters for the Roma, actually, because they know there is someone from their community which they can trust in the school. So if they see it as some institution that they fear something may happen to the child, so having a Romani there is really something good. And of course the mothers and grandmothers and all the families, they want to see their children performing and support them and really enjoy seeing them in school activities. And over there on the bottom corner, it's mothers with their kids on the International Day of the Roma, having some kind of funny activity, but also recognizing the Romani International Day in the classroom meant something for them too. And just in the middle is a Romani teacher. And teacher is a very common profession for Romani women with university education. It's really a profession that they pick a lot, and she has her students from the school. And something that I'm sure you actually already do is working with approaches that are recognizing the home language of the children. They could be different, I believe, and lab activities are really something that could prove very successful, although it's a small gesture, but really an important thing. And migrant children approaches, I believe you know more than me about this, and works with the strengths of the Romani kids. That's something like the extracurricular activities. Just knowing what the kid is interested in, can help a lot in having the children interested in attending school. So, and all Romani kids, of course, as all the teenagers, they're interested in rap music, and all these global tendencies. So they are not interested in performance of Carmen in the theater. So it's so they basically they're kids, and also this is, I doubt if this is something relevant, but still, Romani students from the upper grade that are already, grown ups and can be role models, working with the homeworks of the smaller Romani kids is something that really is both fun and proved to be successful. This is something of the like the small gestures of recognizing the language, and we don't have to know Romani language to actually do this. This is a Swedish classroom. There are only 2 Romani girls in this Swedish class, and they were asked to, every kid was supposed to say something in the Romani language, ideally to write it down, and to draw the flag of every kid of his own country, and they made this Romani flag and said few words in Romani language. This is a poster from Croatia celebrating the International Day of the Romani Language, and this is the same day but taking place in another place in Croatia. So on this day, just kids present Romani personalities and say something in Romani language. And these are some resources that I will send out through Dagbiog probably to all of you. They are of course mainly targeted to teachers working with compact Romani communities or interested in teaching in Romani language, but still I believe there are some very general and basic things that maybe can be applied in your classes. And of course I'm open for questions and for being contacted, and would be really happy to know more about your work. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you for a very good lecture. I was just thinking about the religion and the Lutheran and Catholic.
Yeah. So the religion of the Roma is not it's not a homogeneous thing. It depends on the historical territory in which Roma lived, or of some recent changes that took part. For example, Roma coming from the Ottoman Empire territories, so meaning Bosnia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Macedonia, they could be primarily Muslims. Yes, but also they could have been a religious shift during communism to Orthodoxy or to nothing, or now in the 1990s it's the evangelical movement. So, and these are different missions, like Pentecostalists are like the most popular among the East Europeans Roma. In general, and if we speak about Romanian Roma, they should be primarily Orthodox or Pentecostal, one of this. Yeah. In Sweden, of course, now there are many groups. So they could be Muslims because they come from Yugoslavia during the Yugoslav wars, and they could be some who came from Russia that would be Orthodox again, but they are also Lutherans. So it's so the religion is not something that is really that important for the identity, because Roma themselves are aware that there are different religions, and it depends on the country of origin or of residence. Yeah, Frida.
Thank you. It's really, really interesting. You said something about what decides if the Roma language is going to survive. It's the policy of the host country. Could you explain a little bit?
Actually, the policy of the country is would decide if the Romani language is taught in school. So this is one of the important things. But if we have a state reinforcing policies for studying Romani language, that means language revitalization among Roma who would shift to another language, so they would stick to Romani, and a better praise among the Romani community of the Romani language and other things. But language change can happen also just without any measures of the country. For example, Turkey Turkey is reinforcing a sort of Romani language stimulating policies by funding publications, media, and so on. But the majority of the Roma there already shifted to speaking Turkish, not because there is discrimination, but because they are watching Turkish media, they were doing trade in the streets and so on. So there was this natural language shift, so to say. But definitely, if a country has a policy, that means that the language would flourish, at least among some communities. And of course, there would be greater interest to write and to read in it. But now Roma, I'm amazed by the abilities, by the fact how much internet and YouTube has changed the Romani opinion on the language. They write, they make videos in Romani language and put them, and they know they would be watched all over the world, and this is fascinating for them. So also the global tendencies and the awareness that Romani is like a lingua franca for many of the Roma is also a stimulating thing. That is not a political, but just a
One more question?
Yeah.
You were talking about that Roma people in general value children a lot. Some of the instances we have had here in the schools is that we have found out that a child might be staying with extended family, aunts or cousins or grandparents. So I'm a little I was thinking how this...
So the children, when it's so usually the family unit, it's not like the nuclear family of the Roma, the mother and the father and their kids, but it's usually the grandmother and the grandfather, their sons who are married to Romani women, and then their kids. And if it's within this patriarchal structure, so to say, then it's completely legitimate that a child is taken care by the grandmother or by one of the aunties or grown-up cousin within this, white family. So it's it's considered that they know well how to raise the kids, so the kid can stay. Ideally, the kid has to stay with the mother and the father, but there are different family situations. There are some divorces, then the mother gets a second husband, and in this case, the child can stay with the father or the mother, so there are different situations. But the family, when you say a family for the Roma, it could mean, just the extended unit. Yeah, that could have 20 maybe people. And
what do you recommend when for the girl, maybe 13, 14 years old, she can never go out to dancing, she can never come to school, but the boy or her brother can always come and go as he wants?
Yeah, usually this is what is the boy can study if it's a family or community that practice early marriages. Then the boy can study as much as he wants. and of course many of the boys are not very eager to do that. so it's completely legitimate. He can go out, he can have girlfriends as far as they are not from the Roma communities, to threaten their virginity, so to say. But the girl, for the girl there are real concerns, and of course and there are even instances in which a girl is not married, but because there is an expectancy that she might get married. If this is a group that practices early marriages, then she just stops, and they wait for the marriage union. But of course these are the problematic cases that luckily are not the majority. So, but still, when we compare to the welfare states, it's striking, so to say.
Just think about what you said, because how would you approach that?
Well,
As a teacher?
Yes, for example, this girl, she was crying because she couldn't not go to the dance. Everybody was going to.
yes.
She said my mother would let me go, so I talked to the headmaster and asked, what can we do?
Yes.
Should we interfere with her values, the mother's values, or what can we do?
Yeah.
So I was, in the end, we wrote a letter and told her that we would be there and
Yes.
they would come pick her up.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So in the end, she at least could come once.
Yeah, it's actually a problem that was encountered in many communities, even in communities in which there are Roma teacher, and the Roma teacher says, okay, we go to an excursion. It's 2-day excursion. I will be there, and I will take care. I know the values of the community. I belong to the community, but there are great fears. It's a lot of talk about it, like guaranteeing that you will be all the time there, that there will be no endangerment, the boys won't get drunk and interfere with the Romani girl. So it's really, really a challenging thing, and I think only through talking, on the first place, telling that everybody does this. Do you want your girl to, to be isolated for what is going on? And then telling that you know what they're talking about, you understand the concerns, and that you guarantee that things will be okay. And the point of being there is dancing, not mingling. And but I can understand even the Roma themselves, from the community who work with this Roma, they know, and sometimes they were even inviting a couple of parents from the community to escort the excursion, that is 2 or 3 days, just as guarantee that they would observe and and signal if there's any problem. That's why when you have even a person working whatever job at the school, they know that there is a person, so we can trust the school if this person is around, or this is I understand it's a real challenging thing. And the problem is that in many countries where early marriages are practiced, they are of course decreasing, but still their practice. It is the institutions, they perceive this as part of the Romani culture as well, which is again wrong, because the majority of Roma are not getting married early already. But this is gypsy thing. Come on, we don't declare this to social services or to the persecutor, or we don't go to the police. It's gypsies, they would do themselves. So it's and actually some Roma are used to being ignored. They know what the rules are. They know what the girls at this age do. But it's really I can understand that's a difficult and delicate and challenging thing. And on the top of this, having a language barrier, I can imagine is also. Yeah.